I'm very pleased to introduce Julieanna Richardson for two reasons. The first is she's a homie, and I don't think I've ever said that in any introductions I've made, which may show you how small our home city is, or how undistinguished. I don't. No, there are some quite accomplished people there.
But a city?
A town. 45,000 is almost a metropolitan area.
What town are we talking about, Charles?
Newark.
45,000?
Delaware or New Jersey?
Keep going. There are 7 Newarks in the.
I didn't know there were 7.
Including in Newark, California.
Oh, okay.
Know about that.
And Newark, New Jersey is named after Newark, England. I know all this because my brother was the community development director and went to all the meetings of Newark. But that's neither here. Yes.
But you didn't tell
It was
us.
Sharp James and it's a.
Well, which Newark are we talking about?
We're talking about the most famous one, Newark, Ohio.
Don't laugh.
And not only is it the most famous Newark, but I feel a part of Julianne's family. Her father is my honorary godfather.
Oh.
So I remember a few years ago when I was being interviewed for a government position, and they did an FBI background check, and they wanted someone from my childhood. I said, how about my Sunday school teacher? And so I gave them her father's name, and they called him. And I guess he gave me a good report. I got the position. So I'm quite honored that she's come here. She's a history maker in herself, having graduated from Harvard Law and pioneered in the cable television industry in Chicago, and then has turned herself, her energy into this fabulous project, HistoryMakers. You know, whenever we have a week like this past one with Johnny Cochran dying, and I don't know if any of you knew Harold Cruz, who passed away this week. You just hope and pray that somebody has done an oral history of these people, because they have such rich lives that we can learn from. And so I'm so pleased that she's taken on this project. And she put me on the advisory board. I'm on a lot of advisory boards, so I hadn't done much. And then she invited me to Chicago to hear B.B. King's interview with Isaac Hayes. And I couldn't turn that down, so I went. And then we had a fabulous conversation about what we could do on the West Coast. And this is a part of that. I hope that UC Berkeley will be a base, as well as UCLA, that started in the Midwest and then gradually expanded. She'll tell you more about that. And the chair of our department will be here any minute. He teaches till 5, but I thought I would get things started. So, Julianne, it's a pleasure to have you here at Berkeley.
Thank you. As Charles said, he only told half the story. I was always envious. I was the oldest of 4 girls, and so my father wanted a son, and Charles was his son. So, you know, anyway.
I should have taken up golf.
That's right. So actually, my 84-year-old father is coming out with this book on his technique of golf, teaching golf. It's a pleasure really to be here, and I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your schedule today. We're actually here this week doing interviews out here in the Bay Area, and I realize I had not been here for 4 years. But Loretta is doing interviews for us. Loretta also hails from Newark, Ohio, by way of Dayton, Ohio. And Scott Stearns is our videographer, and we, I want to talk, you know, about the project. I'd like to just start with a videotape, but essentially what we're trying to do here with the History Makers is create the largest repository of African American video oral history interviews. Our niche is video oral history interviews. And I often, you know, different of us come from different backgrounds and things like that. In our town, what I remember studying of African American history was slavery and George Washington Carver. And it was sort of hard for me to think that a man could have done all those things with peanuts when all we had then were slaves. So this sort of didn't make sense. And then it was not until I was doing research during my sophomore year at Brandeis University that I, in the rich treasure trove of the Schomburg Library, found that I, actually had a history. And it was those stories that really sort of captivated me. And then at the sort of mid-stage of my life, I decided that I wanted to do something that would essentially would leave a legacy. Can I show? Okay. I have a short clip. We have a lot of video right now with anticipation of having a lot more. Yeah.
Video too.
So was it queued up? Yeah. Let's fast forward. Okay, right there. Whoops.
Yeah, that'll make the contrast a little
The
bit.
attitude of the NAACP and other organizations.
Okay, you got it. Oops, it must be far. Oh, no. Okay, right. You got it.
Was the only professional civil rights worker in the whole state of Mississippi. Within months after we went in 1961, we must have had 25 to 30 people working in Mississippi. The attitude of the NAACP and other organizations was it was too dangerous to work here. A witness, Medgar, was murdered. But we said, that's precisely why you have to go here.
One of the first messages Vietnamese gave us was that, and they always called us from the time we hit the campus, it was young men. Young men. This is a segregated city. You might have to ride a segregated bus to go downtown. But gentlemen do not pay to be insulted. You never to go to a movie house and pay to be segregated.
My great-grandfather, Aaron Holloway, was one of, he told me that he only knew he was one of many children, and he had a sister that lived in Cleveland, Ohio. And then he told me about his other brothers and sisters. And I said, well, where are they? And he said, they passed. They're white now. Well, where are they? They're all parts of the United States. So they went on, that Holloway side went on to be white. In Little Rock, per se, I know my mother's, at one time I think they had white on there for a card, like in the library. They would look at her and then write it down.
One day I was watching a show on television that John Oliver Killens and Gil Noble, who had a show called Like It Is, and he was interviewing John Oliver Killens about the Harlem Writers Guild. And I was like, I heard of it. And I didn't even know it was still in existence. And he talked about how they meet and all this, and I mean, by now I've got a little suitcase full of stories that I haven't done anything with. These vignettes and all this kind of stuff. But also I've written this short story called Mama Take Another Step. And so I called them. They said, just send your work and we'll let you know if you get accepted. And I was like, well, okay. So I did, and I got in, and I started meeting with this group of wonderful writers, some of whom are being published right now.
As African Americans, we cannot break a tie with Africa, no matter how hard we try. We cannot break a tie with the America in which we live, because we do live in it. Therefore, it became a thing, my way of thinking, of not reconciliation, but of wisdom, of knowledge, of understanding of, probing into, delving into, and coming out of this complex of these two cultures mixing in with each other, coming out of that with a not necessarily new culture, but a new knowledge of self and a new feeling about being.
And that's essentially what we are trying to do with the History Makers, is to come up with a new sense of the African American experience, not by fictionalized accounts, but by actually recording the actual history of African Americans as told by the first person. I've been asking people, I've been talking around the country a lot recently in small groups, and people have been asking me a lot of hard questions. Why would I do this? What's the importance? And is it like this? You know, I mean, what is all this being done for? And I've been asking a question back, and I want to start out by asking each of you to think about this question, and that is, what is the legacy of African Americans in this country? And I asked that question from the vantage point of those who are African Americans, those who are not, you know, even in the larger society. What is the African American experience? How is it to be described? Some might say that, you know, we are people that move from enslavement to poverty and crime. Some might say that, you know, people have said that, you know, our legacy is struggle. We believe, I actually believe that our record shows that in many ways we may represent the racial story of this country. But the thing is that we know that we can show a record of achievement, often against great odds. Not in a fictionalized accounts, but in actual things that actually happen. What are we trying to do? We're trying to create an archival collection of 5,000 stories. People often ask me, how did you choose that number? Well, random. I wanted to do twice the number, almost twice the number of the slave narratives, which that collection, in the absence of anything else, is a significant collection, but they were hand recorded, and the slaves were old when they were interviewed and young when slavery ended. But it is a significant collection. The other, we also, because there's a Spielberg Shoah Foundation project, which I studied quite a bit at the beginning part of this project, and Spielberg did 52,000 interviews in 5 years, so I thought 10%. It's not such a bad, you know. And in our community, that would represent a significant amount. So that's what, you know, we have, and that's why I tell people, and some people say, why are you so bent on that 5,000? And we are. And so what this also represents is an ability to take traditional oral history and combine it with state-of-the-art technology. You know, oral history is still a, you know, early discipline, having started really officially as a discipline in the 1940s. Anyway, we want to expose the collection to the widest audience possible using the internet public programs. In fact, many ways we consider ourselves oral history, public history initiative with a strong focus on education and technology. And we want to preserve this collection for generations to come. Now, we define a history maker one of two ways, and historians understand this outside of the scholarly communities. They're grappling with the second one. One, we look at, you know, number one is more sort of a who's who within different disciplines. Someone who's made significant accomplishments and has their own life. But we also are looking for those who are associated with a movement, organization, association, event in time that's important to the African American community. And some people have a hard time putting their hands around it. During the early years, you know, we were looking at a lot of Tuskegee Airmen and Pullman Porters, and that actually in our early years ended up, we had a lot more men in our collection than women, so we're trying to sort of correct that. But anyway, you know, people say, because, you know, there are different types of oral histories. What we do are essentially what are called life histories. We're not doing subject matter histories like the Great Migration or the Holocaust. And so we're essentially trying to take people through their life and out of that pull these snippets of history or historical associations with them. But we say that essentially we are America's Missing Stories. That's how we're sort of branding us. Now, we have these current programs. One is our program to do interviews, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other is about 3 years ago, we started something called the HistoryMakers Education Institute. What I realized, you exist in an academic environment, but outside, archives sound old and dusty and not of much use. It took me about 3 years into the project to realize that, people thought I was animated and excited. They could not quite understand, what it was. We have this celebrity interview program that Charles mentioned, one where we had Isaac Hayes interviewing B.B. King, but we've done, Angela Davis interviewing Lassie Davis and Ruby Dee, and Danny Glover interviewing Harry Belafonte. So people would come to the program every year, and even though I would get up and talk about the archive and everything, I heard someone say, you're that person, you do that PBS program, right? And so I was like fuming, because this is, what we're not about. What we're about is really the creation of an archive. But we started this Education Institute, and we've been piloting it in Chicago Public Schools for the last 3 years. We also have the HistoryMakers Speakers Bureau, and we're actually sitting potentially on the largest African American Speakers Bureau in the country. We have a website, which I want to talk about, and then the real goal is this digital archive. Started in June of 1999, and at that time, friends who knew me, who knew I wanted to do this, asked me to answer two questions. One, did an archive like the one that was envisioned, did it exist already? And if it didn't exist and one was created, would anyone be interested? And they theorized no. And after all, how would I make a living doing this? No one was really interested in stories about black people anyway. And so I did at that time develop a concept paper because I didn't know a lot about how the archive could be possibly used. And so I didn't know a lot about, because I'm a lawyer by training, about the library and archival community or documentary film producing and things like that. But we started doing interviews in February of 2000. And that first year we did 70 interviews, really in Chicago, using that sort of as our test bed because that's where we're from. I also wanted to make sure, and my legal training came in handy at this point because I really was doing my due diligence. Anytime I would hear about an archival collection, one friend of mine gave me a book of African American stock footage. I went through in extreme detail, looking at every line and talking to stock footage collections to see what they had in their collection and what we were talking about. I visited and talked to the archivists at the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian to see what they had in their collection. I went and paid homage to Howard Dodson at the Schomburg Library and told him my intent, about the project, and he has been very supportive. Actually, it's the Schomburg and the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum that were the largest until we surpassed them. The Schomburg has about 300 interviews, as does the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum. It took the Schomburg 20 years ago, their collection, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum about 10. But we're collaborating with both and hope that places like Berkeley and other museums and libraries around the country will be a place where we will be able to have our digital archive accessible. We did things in the first years in 2000. These are some of our, between 2000 and 2002. We launched with our celebrity interview series, and we actually have 6 programs. This year we're doing 3. It's based really, I love Bravo Inside the Actors Studio because that was sort of about telling stories, and so I based it on that. Then in 2001, and this is a stat I'm not particularly proud of, we were happy at the time, but we got a $250,000 grant from the Knight Foundation. That's our largest grant to date, to record stories around the country. And then in June of 2002, we actually became special collection, classified as special collections, part of the Illinois State Library system. Where are we now? We're 1,100 interviews. Our goal is to be at 1,500 by the end of 2005. We have teams of people around interviewing across the country. In the early years, it was me doing a lot of the interviews at the beginning. And then we have offices in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta. We hope Berkeley being our third location. And we actually, in Atlanta, were the National Park Service. We struck a deal with them where, I changed? Okay, that's okay. Just we struck a deal with them at the national, heard, and they had to track down the people who were significant in his organization. But I had heard that he had done what he had done very well in terms of educating his staff. And for doing interviews for us is a very complicated process. I mean, the ideal scenario, we would have subject matter specialists, and they would be assigned to do people all across, different parts of the country. But that's the imaginary world. And so we don't have that, but you want people to be prepared as much as you can. This is our coverage area now. As you see, on the western part of the United States, we have a lot of work to do, and even the Southwest. Probably, of our 1,100, I would say about 250, maybe 300 are in Chicago, and the same in Washington, D.C. Those are where we have really concentrated our efforts. Probably our strongest list now is coming out of New York. But we have someone now helping us with Black LA, Hollywood, right now. So we're a project, though, that has a little ADD, if you don't mind my expression. If people make it too hard for us, if someone had told me, this is a tremendously expensive undertaking, but if someone had told me that it was, that sourcing people, and Frank keeps telling me, Frank Green is actually on our board, and it's been very helpful over the last day and a half introducing me to people. But if people had told me it was as hard to source, when I say source, if you ever see me, I'm like taking down notes about names. I don't trust people, that they're going to follow up, or getting names but no contact information. And in the imaginary world, if I didn't have to go and raise money, I would have been in a cave, with a massive computer with people feeding names in. And you could have things categorized and everyone would be alive, and you could do things more methodically. So we are essentially really in a race against time. This is where we want to be by 2009, 2010. It's a $30 million project. Go back here. This is how we plan to sort of get there. You'll see. We look to build incrementally, and that's why the regions, we've tested it. We know that one team, an interviewer and a videographer, if they work full-time, can do 200 interviews a year. It's not for the faint of heart. In the early years, when people would go on the road with me, they were like, that mad woman, because our days are often 10 to 12-hour days. And then there's the preparation that has to go along with things, and just keeping everything sort of going. So it's a very aggressive schedule, but if you love it, it's wonderful. This is our funding to date. You see the state of Illinois has been good to us. Foundations, I'd like foundations to fund us more. A lot of our funding has been out of project money, meaning that they made an exception to the rule. So it's made us, for our project, having to rely on special events and in-kind support. We have had the good blessing of having the Hilton Hotels, who's been putting us up since the beginning, and American Airlines, who's been flying us around since the beginning. Those are all blessings. Places like the Chicago Tribune have given us like $250,000 of ad support. We're now working out arrangements with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the Washington Post to have similar arrangements with, and we actually are doing, we're now starting to encourage journalists to be active users of our archives and to use it as a resource. Individual giving we want to boost up, and we're looking at some creative ways to doing it because we're going to have to build from the ground up in many ways. And we have this program sponsor, HistoryMaker, $2,500 an interview. Anyway, a little bit about our education institute. As I said, you know, people were having a hard time, like, what is this really for? I mean, I feel like I'm talking like this is a friendly audience because people, there are librarians and archivists in here, so they understand archives. But what we did back, actually, Frank, I think that was the year you came out. We had done our Knight Foundation. We had almost finished our Knight Foundation, and what had happened during the year that actually Guy and Carol interviewed Dionne Warwick, it was September 11th, and that had been like a horrific experience because, like, you know, I think our event was in October and September 11th had happened in September, and that year we had interviewed people like he just died this year. Jim.
Ossie Davis?
Well, not Ossie Davis we had interviewed that year, but we had done SNCC.
Jim Foreman.
Jim Foreman. And we had he and Leo Branton, and I can't remember several other people, and people didn't know who they were. And that was bothersome to me. And so what happened, we had the good graces because we had a place, a Wyndham hotel chain, and Dionne and Diane didn't want to stay in the Hilton that we had. So the Wyndham opened them with, you know, these arms, and they met Jim Foreman, Leo Branton, and they came to me the next year and said, you know, we would love to host, you know, an education day. And they gave us literally 150 room nights. We'll never ever see, I mean, totally free of charge. And we put together this wonderful program and brought in 70 of our history makers from around the country. And we developed special curriculum and set up a computer lab and did oral history training, and that was the beginning of our education institute. And since that time, this is, you know, we've had about 1,000 students go through the program. And actually, Meet the History Makers, a Day of Education, morphed into a year-long program in Chicago Public Schools, which we have a summer training institute, ongoing teacher support. We've positioned it, we have this It's Cool to Succeed mentoring program, which we actually bring history makers in as role model mentors. And we have a Black History Month thing where we sort of take over and do school assemblies. And this Mine Own Story is really them trying to find, you know, history makers of their own liking in their community. But we've positioned it as a reading, writing, literacy initiative with the theme of determination. We've had some very good collaborative partners. One of them, the DePaul Center for Urban Education, worked with us to help us sort of position it. And we're really pretty excited, and we're looking to expand this program. We'll be doing it in Atlanta on a test basis. And as I was saying that, since we work so much with corporate America, we're looking to do more things from a Speakers Bureau point. And we'd like to also work with college campuses too. Since we have so many people that have really sort of signed up, and we can do programs that are about that person, but also about certain themes. This is our website, and our website is how you access this right now. It's not what is totally envisioned. But our website is sort of a success story. As you see, we've identified 15 categories. Style makers, I was just talking to Gwen about that because she has very interesting history in the fashion and beauty industry. But I've identified these categories. These categories are not exclusive, you know, because you could have NACP makers, or under music makers, you could have gospel makers, jazz makers. But this is how people access our site. We start out with 1,000 hits per month. This is a typical page. Starting with Julieanna, we ask people to bring photos of themselves, and we have them narrate them. And we did that because we saw that it was going to be hard. There weren't a lot of photo collections that would be easy for us to access. And then we were interviewing people that weren't, you know, all the well-known people that you would have ready access to photos, so we did that. We're now getting 2 to 4 million hits per month. It's very good for a site that has no, I mean, we're small, it's not like we have the right links and things like that. Google has actually rated us one of the top African American sites on the internet. Yesterday we were meeting with David Drummond, who's the general counsel of Google. And if you go...
Who's also an African American would be an outstanding.
Yes. So we were telling him, you know, because this is, you know, I was really sort of amazed. We were without a webmaster for about 1.5 years. And when we start pulling out stats, at first we got to the million mark, and I was like, million? It's been very interesting to see where our users have come from. And the UK, Netherlands, Lithuania. Lithuanians were, and Canada. Germany also, I think, has been one of the users. Lithuanians, we're looking at an average of 59 page views, which we found a little strange. We didn't know. We were like, I bet some black Lithuanians we don't know about. Anyway, it shows that there's interest outside the United States. We think at the time, actually, that happened. That was the year we were featuring B.B. King. 100 colleges and universities, the government agencies like the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, whole school districts, like we know the school district of Lexington to Kentucky has adopted our site as a teaching tool. And then news gathering places like WGN, CBS, ABC. In fact, we looked up, there was, I don't know if people know Etta Moulton Barnett, but she was the second person who played Bess in Porgy and Bess on Broadway. And so when she passed, I know Scott said he saw there was our watermark up, you know, on the news. They had just grabbed it off our site, which that's the whole thing. The purpose really is to develop this digital archive, and we want to develop that as a VPN, a virtual private network that's available at colleges and universities. I feel very strongly about that. Mainly because we want to protect our asset while we want to make it accessible, but we do not want stories. The thing about the internet, you cannot determine who's using things, and you don't want things misquoted or taken out of context, and it's really a big concern because when we're doing interviews, we want people to be as disclosing as possible. Now, if someone wants to, you know, seal their interview until after their death or a point in time, we're more than willing to do it. And one thing that I've not done, but I still want to do, is develop an ethics policy for the collection that will outlive my being there, because the material can end up in the wrong hands. And I remember in the early days when I was talking to people at the Library of Congress and I was saying, I want the things on the internet, and they were looking at me like, oh my God, that's horrible. You know, we've digitized all these things. And in the same breath, they said, you know, but people are using them for commercial stuff and things, and we're concerned, and we're having our lawyers check it out. And this is a community, the African American community, we're just now starting to open up. And we don't want the community closing down. And you know, there's a woman here named Alva Davis who's one of our history makers. She was interviewed by the National Press Club. They had a whole project. She was horrified that her interview ended up on a website unedited. Now, had it been us, you know, that could have ended our project. She would have said, I'll have nothing to do with that, you know, the history makers again. So we're very concerned about that, and so that's why I want to be protective while, you know, I would like there to be accessibility. Now, we are trying to archive to the level of scholarly use. We figure if we do that level, but it's complicated And we, in September of 2003, received a National Leadership Grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. And it was to digitize, we're in partnership with Carnegie Mellon. There's a brilliant technologist who's been working with money from the National Science Foundation and the Department of Defense. And we're to encode 400 interviews. We're behind schedule. But it would represent 40% of the collection and 1,200 hours of video. And I'm going to show that. This is what our goal is, that, you know, it would be accessible. This is the thought. The other thing that I really did not anticipate at the beginning, but as we start looking at what were we going to use for our thesaurus, you know, and where could we search, we found a lot of subject matter thesaurus, but we didn't find a comprehensive. And we've been using Brown subject headings sort of as a starting point, but what we know, that was developed by African American librarians to supplement the Library of Congress subject headings. And there are all kinds of discussions about whether you use whole language or, you know, you use the arcane language of, you know, librarians. But the thing is that you have to have some type of controlled vocabulary. You have a free-for-all. I mean, it's only as good as the person who created it. And so what we know will happen now is we're going to have one of the most comprehensive African American thesaurus, just because our interviews are across such a large discipline. I mean, so many disciplines. We believe in strategic alliances and partnerships, academic, and that's why we're here. We'd like to have a partnership here. Community partnerships is very important. While we want to involve the scholarly community, we have to involve the community itself, because they know the history, and a lot of the history resides in people. And also people being able to help us identify who we should talk to. Media partnerships I've talked about, and then technology partnerships, which we hope this area will be helpful to us. This is a program we're having. Actually, now we turned the tables, and One Eyeful will be interviewed by Diane Carroll, and then that's in May of this year, and then in June, Nikki Giovanni will be interviewed by Pearl Cleage, and then October, Jesse Norman is being interviewed by Anna DeVere Smith. We're doing women this year.
Ooh,
okay. So I say what makes us unique is this traditional oral history combined with state-of-the-art technology, that we're a significant educational resource and historic one-of-a-kind initiative. And I do want to just show this. Frank he says, I'm in the land of technology, and why do I need to show it? It's okay.
Because you recorded
okay. It's coming up. I had been, there are not that many places doing, well, I shouldn't say. Before the dot-com bust, there were a lot of things, video indexing things, experiments happening. And one of them is this Infomedia video library, and there are commercial applications based on this technology, one being Garage, which we can't afford, and another software called Excalibur. And when we had our National Planning Summit, we had a woman named Susan Madison, who's been the archivist for the cable industry. They are doing an oral history project. And they had cataloged 90 hours of their collection. It cost them $100,000. And Viraj did the cataloging. So it's just extremely labor intensive. And this project was based on one theory, or one assumption that was a horrific assumption. I assumed that there were going to be a lot of retired librarians and school teachers lined up around our building waiting to help. And we need them desperately because, garbage in, garbage out. We love young people, and they know how to use computers, and really, we have people who come in and they're like, do you have something else? But we have to create transcripts. This technology is based on written transcript. I personally believe in the concept of written transcript. The Shoah Foundation did not create transcripts. They thought them too labor intensive, but The problem with the transcript is that it has to be read for accuracy. Now, the thing is that you can say, and I'm a lawyer, and I used to do drafting, and so any typo, just like immediately, you know, is like, which you can't be like that. But the thing is that names, geographic location, and dates. And there's also this whole thing. Let's say someone is talking about lynching, but they don't mention the word lynching, or it's feminism, you know, or any other subject, but they don't mention. What if people are, you know, you want to bring up everyone who's laughing, or stories of inspiration. These are the things that even if you have technology that can do some automatic cataloging, you want to do that other part to make it usable. Otherwise, you're ending up with a Boolean search. I only have 18 interviews in here, but someone give me a keyword. I mean, something, a subject, I'll search on it.
Science.
Science? Okay.
Can you do science and civil rights?
Okay, hold on. Well, let's do science first. I hope something comes up. Okay. So we got 35 results. And see, what this does, you can just sort of scroll over and it will show you what is talking. We even have Ossie Davis there. And we've got Alvin Toussaint, Leo Branton. So anyway, this is Richard Hunt. I wonder what he's talking about. He's an artist out of Chicago. You'll see here that the red marks there, those red marks are where the...
I'm interested in history and science, well, yeah, biological science. And yeah, so there were those...
So, you know, educators have liked this because they say it'll keep, you know, teach kids how to read, you know, because the words sort of go along and scroll, as you say. Oh, no!
Sculpture and history or something.
The other thing, he had worked with footage from CNN, and so that's moving footage, and we don't have, you know, moving footage. And so there were things in there. I don't know if you saw a box around Marion Edelman's face. That was sort of a face detection software. That's not really so important because we have talking heads. But you know, and they've done a lot of interesting things around maps. We are particularly interested in timelines, and I'm hoping that he can sneak in some more development on the timeline. But this shows, like right here, now the computer automatically goes through our text document and comes up with phrases, people, organization, and places. So, you know, if we wanted to see, you know, who was on, I was talking about, there's Harvard or political science. And then he did other things with maps. So you could see, like, there's Marion Edelman talking about Switzerland. So it really helps, this technology will help unlock the archives, you know, in many ways, and we're hoping really will be a true educational resource, because look at this, we have about 3,500 hours of African American testimony on tape, with anticipation we'll get to 20 to, you know, almost maybe 20, 25,000 hours. And that becomes, you know, in the old days you would say, okay, and if you came to Chicago right now, you would say, okay, we have this interview, you know, there's a finding aid, but, you know, it's 3 hours, you know, we think they were talking about such and such, but, you know, look it up. So we want to really unlock this in ways that have not been, you know, possible before. And we need the scholars really helping us, you know, in many ways. We're at the point right now where we want our interviews to be critiqued, and so we can make our process better. We need to have people helping us in the research process. Right now, our scholars, and Charles was on a call where we were actually talking about timelines, that to help our interviewers do a better job, we want to create timelines by subject matter, as well as timelines by a geographic location. Just anything that will give an interviewer more props. The other thing is that I should talk about, I'm going to say this and I'll just open up for questions because I've talked enough. This whole thing, in many ways, our technique, and I don't know how many of you in the room have done oral histories. I can't talk enough about the discipline. I think it's, you know, in many ways, a marvelous process to sit through an oral history interview and the things that you find. Often oral historians say that the making of the history is that moment of the interaction between the interviewer and the videographer. And it's clear that we're uncovering some just wonderful things that we did not know about. And I remember even in the early days of the project when I was saying that, you know, I was trying to balance off sort of well-known and unsung, and I was going to interview a man named Colonel Thompson, who was he was a Tuskegee Airman, but I hadn't really heard of Colonel Thompson. Well, Colonel Thompson had prepared for us for 4 days, and he had literally boxes of photos, you know, pieces of planes. And he sits me down and he says, "Do you know about the Golden 13? And I said, "No, Colonel Thompson, I don't know about the Golden 13. And he said, "They were the Navy's version of the Tuskegee Airmen, and there are 4 living in this country, and 1 lives upstairs, and he wants to talk to you also." And it was at that moment that I knew that we were in the process of discovery, and that's what is the exciting part of this project, and why I ask everyone here in the room to participate to the extent that you can, because each day we're losing so much of our history, and we have to really work together to get together aggressively. Even our, you know, a lot of people really think that we're a civil rights project because that's their concept of Black history, civil rights. But even our modern day, huh?
Not a bad concept.
It's not a bad concept, but it's not the only concept. Okay. No, it's not, and it's a positive story, you know, in terms of our role, in terms of the American experience and the things that have come, you know, both the women's, you know, all the movements that have come as a, you know, after the civil rights movement. But there's a huge amount of history out there that still needs to really be documented. And so I'm just asking for your assistance in that, and I, you know, will stop talking and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Frank?
Julianna, did you want to go around and ask people about their thoughts about this legacy?
Yes, I would.
About this legacy.
About African American.
About African American legacy. Well, one of the things I do is a lot with legacy. I go into schools and conferences and talk about African American history. And so this is very important to me and very, very necessary. I can see the importance of this transitioning into the average person, like my great-grandparents, talking to them, because so much information, as you were talking, I was thinking of one of my uncles who's now 90, and who told the story of how my grandfather actually got his 200 acres of land in Texas, and his dealings with the German people who were the actual owners of the land. But these are the kinds of stories that I tell to children and to adults, and so hearing these stories, many people come to me and say, "Oh, I'm so excited to talk to a woman whose grandfather was from Russia." And she says, "Immediately I went home and I talked to my mother and we went through our archives, and I want to know about our history." So it really needs to be brought to the forefront, and it's the kind of thing that I do a lot.
But let me ask you, if you were to answer the question about what our legacy is, what is the perception of our legacy, or what is our legacy?
I think that America would not exist without people of African origin, and if we knew exactly the skills and the talents and just the impact of African people on this country itself, it would be a totally different country. You know, the artistic, the creations, the science, the farming techniques, so many skills were brought here. The country would have no wealth were it not for African American people.
But is that how we're perceived in the larger community?
It's not really how we're perceived, but I think that more and more people are beginning to understand that, and I think it needs to be talked about a lot, and what you're doing. And people need to know, and our children need to know. Students right here at the university need to know. And so I think that what you're doing is so valuable.
Charles, why would you answer the legacy question? Thank you.
You don't have 90 minutes.
Okay.
90 days.
Charles just
90 days.
Okay.
General population that there is black intellectual history.
That's true.
And so that's one of my interests, my academic interests, as well as interests in terms of the history makers.
Okay, that's true. That's an area we should. Yeah. You're the head of the department, right?
Oh.
How are you?
No, there's a tremendous need for what you're doing, because the way you're approaching it is how people really embrace and learn things, is through visually. So when they can see African American history makers, I mean, when the population of this country can see people who have actually made such incredible contributions to our culture, to our lifestyle, to science, it's very important.
No one's answering my legacy question. How would you answer it, though? Yes.
I think for me it's a hard question because legacy to me implies that we're still here. So for me it's a hard question in terms of that word, but I thought about it, and I think that for me it has to do with mutability and transformation and yeah, I would say those.
But you know, legacy now, legacy has a finality to it, sort of, too.
It does, and that's why it's a difficult word for me, because we're still, you know, we're still.
But up to this point, up to this point, okay, up to this point.
I would disagree. Legacy to me is an organic.
It's organic.
Being, and the value of something like this is basically a message of connectedness that our people need to know. Now, psychologically, our tendencies have been to be past, present oriented. Something like this, where we are connected not just to people who have lived and are gone, and their growth, their gifts to the rest of us, but we have got to develop as a people, and I'm thinking now about my own children and my grandchildren, a sense of self, strong interpersonal, intra and interpersonal intelligence, which this kind of subject matter, or this legacy, which I believe is a growing, breathing, moving thing, to take us from past, present, to past, present, future, with good common sense. A little preachy there, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Well, an image came to my mind of legacy being the roots, the trunk, and the branches of a tree, which is never ending and always flowering. But that having the root as a space, as a place to come from, as a tree does every year, if you're looking at it for future generations, it's a way for them to get a sense of the root and continue to be the branches, the flowers, or the leaves, with the knowledge of what came before them.
So there's possibility there.
I would say
Okay.
not just possibility, but, well, yes. There's another.
Opportunity.
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 Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Well, for me, the legacy is the ability to have come through the experience of being brought here against will of the part of those brought, and to somehow make something, as you say, that flowers, and that has been a huge contribution to the society as a whole. And to be cognizant of what Baldwin said, hatred destroys the hater. It'd be so easy to be so angry all the time, and they're mostly not angry people in amongst Black Americans. And I think that is, we all need to know that and to try to be like that.
See, this is exactly what we've been having this discussion, but I think. Okay, you. I'm sorry.
I'm still thinking.
Oh, you're still thinking. Because we've been having this discussion. I mean, literally, I started asking this question because people are asking a lot of hard questions of me, and they didn't get it, And like I said, you guys are an easier audience, but they didn't get, they haven't gotten the project. And they want the project to be, a video or a book or, something, tangible.
It's a
but
living,
the heart
thing.
See, but Frank says that we are the heart of, of America.
And we are.
And the conscience. But I say, even with that answer, why, if I go and ask the average person on the street, and I have to play because we're a minority in a majority society, what would the average white person say? That would not be their answer.
Because they don't know each other well.
Okay,
those two societies.
Right. So that's what I'm saying, is that there is an opportunity here, I believe, to correct it, and that's the hope, in many ways, that in the organic that you talk about, there's a possibility, but you can't do that unless you record it, and you can't. And then you have to disseminate it to make it happen. But the thing is that I really think that, it goes back to our whole, Charles has just done a book, he says, on reparations, and we were talking about it, and I said, he's from a political perspective, and I said, what about the legal economic? But the thing is that we are still in this country dealing with our slave heritage. It's taken us 5 years just to start opening the Black community up. It's not like, even though the Shaw Foundation said that, I think they did 52,000 interviews, but I think at the time there were 150,000 Holocaust survivors, so some people, they were having trouble, but people came rushing there. The Black community is, who's your family? Who sent you? What are you going to do with that material? The Black nationalists, I've had the hardest time. They don't trust us. It's like, what are you going to do with them? We don't want to give
But do you understand why that trust line is not there?
No, I do understand.
Especially at this point in our history?
I understand. I understand. But the thing is that, but that's the issue, is that there's so many things that have played a role psychologically, so many things that have played a role that white community doesn't really want to be, reminded of it. It's over. Get over it, if you haven't already. And the Black community, it came out of a lot of shame. Who wanted to be a slave? And the other things that have been done, during the time period. And those both communities are almost in complicity. Unintentionally, but in complicity, to cover it all up.
Well, Phyllis and I have been partners in intellectual crime for 30 years here at Berkeley.
Okay.
Phyllis has been a librarian at Doe, and I do archival consulting to the Bancroft now. And one of the things that I think I've come to understand is that Black people do not value the things that represent us in terms of, how do I want to put this? the things that represent us in terms of collections and letters and why is this letter important. And about 25 years ago, I went into the Smithsonian and I saw George Washington's teeth. And I said, the white people have George Washington's teeth. These white people value. This is something that is important. And we have been on a mission, Phyllis and I have been on a mission to collect all kinds of archives and documents that can serve as a mirror for black people to look at and say, oh, this is who we are. I had no idea. But your project becomes one of those points of reflection. And it's as though these need to be roadsides.
That's right.
Just like you have highway markers, these need to be roadsides and mirrors that reflect in as many points as possible. And that's a daunting task when the primary mirror that everybody looks at every day is the television set or the internet, and what's reflected back there is such a narrow lens, such a stereotypical lens, and such a distorted lens. And I think, back to your question about legacy, I think it is something that evolved, and it's broader than, I don't think you can put it in a neat little box and say, this is the legacy. I think there are so many branches of the legacy, and I think that as you interview people and as we look at all of these various repositories all over the country now, and as the history of Africa continues to be uncovered, which we cannot separate ourselves out from that history, because now archivists are finding manuscripts that were written before Gutenberg invented the printing press. That says a lot about our history that we don't understand, that we had the ability to write and read text.
There are 700,000 pages that have been unearthed from Timbuktu that almost no one is aware of. And recently, I had the opportunity to listen to this young man who is from Timbuktu and whose family history goes back many, many, many generations there, and they found papers in a box withering away and disintegrating, and he's trying to raise money to save those papers, which were written in Amharic by Africans. And Amharic is the same language that Christ spoke. So, I mean, you start connecting all those dots, but to add something that you said, I think that part of why African Americans don't open up and don't look at the history is because of the shame that came with slavery. I know that with my own grandmother, who was very white, whenever I asked questions, it was, she didn't want to talk about it. And that could come out of the pain or whatever. And so even if we're not conscious of it, it's a damped down psychological way that we've coped and felt shame for having come from that heritage, because we didn't think of the heritage from the other side. We've never thought about it in terms of contribution. And when you were speaking of the contribution, that's where it starts to bring it together, where people could embrace it. So maybe it's a matter of how you language what it is that you choose to do that will engage people in a totally different way. Because you see the psychological that you have to overcome in being able to present this in a way that it can be heard differently.
I'd just like to say that I liked what you said about trying to place this material in a number of university and college settings, and also to protect its integrity. And the fact is, so often I've seen people develop something fabulous, and then they will sell it to a big company like ProQuest in Michigan, and then it becomes, I mean, you would get very rich by doing it, but you would also exclude very people you want to be seeing this. And so I urge you to try to keep it in the public domain and have it for the people who need it so much. I mean, the whole society needs it.
Right, right.
And they won't get it if it goes to a place like ProQuest. I mean, I just think they're criminal myself.
Okay.
But
Now, oh, we've got it. I wanted to ask about the...
I wanted to ask Phyllis a question too.
I had a question about the...
Since you've been in this business for a while, let's assume that this archive is done, it's complete, it's, you know, it's scholarly correct, and it's all indexed, and it's available. How would you like to see it used? How could it be most effectively used? Where could it be most effectively used?
well, I think having if it's digital, it can be in many places at the same time. And so I think to have it available for schools, school children, school teachers, have it on the campuses, and then available maybe through the website, say if you chose Berkeley or the other places where you have it. If people came to the university website, then they might be able to
How would they use
access.
it?
Well, they would search it. I
know. I mean, I
Yeah.
understand the technical.
Right.
But what would they be looking to accomplish by just saying, I went through it?
learning
What
about
would they be
these
learning?
lives and about that history and about those periods of history and those occupations and the war, if it was the Tuskegee era people or the Navy people, or how to teach, or what Dunham's life, all these lives. I mean, why do people read biography? It's the same motivation, I think.
I think it would also work very well in newsrooms.
Yes.
To contextualize stories.
Boy,
If journalists knew that this information was easily available and they are doing background for a story, here's a reliable site that you can go to do some initial research for the story that then takes you to 2 or 3 other levels of research, so you really can contextualize these stories that you are putting up there.
I want to add, though, something about, because oral history has struggled to be a discipline. It is subjective. So we hope that the scholarly community will tear apart, and look critically and see, because people talking about their own lives may be making mistakes, or they may be,
Yeah, but that's true of any autobiography. Like you wanted to. And there are many sides to a truth.
No, that's right. That's
So,
right.
I mean, you always want to look at it
from different.
I was thinking about something in terms of the site itself. It's going to be hit upon if people are looking for certain kinds of information, but what you need to do over and beyond that is create an awareness level. And so as you're looking at your budgets, I mean, I almost saw in my mind some kind of marketing advertising campaign that becomes an adjunct to what you're doing in order for the broader public to have an awareness of what it is you're creating.
That's right.
What is available, because if no one knows it's available unless they're looking for the research, what difference does it make?
No, you're absolutely right. And we did this thing. The Simmons Latham people, Russell Simmons, had come to us and they produced this documentary series. And I went back and forth about what to do with this. And they took, some of our better known names, of course. And they did one on faith, success, and courage. But they did reenactments. What I congratulate them is that they put about $100,000 in the project, and they did reenactments. And it made the archives come alive. Marketing, they have done not a good job. But this, I was sitting in an audience of college students, and they were wanting to talk a lot afterwards. They were hearing things they had never heard before. And so you're right about that, though, is that we don't have a marketing tool right now.
And that could be a beginning marketing tool if you could get the Simmons Foundation to do 500,000 of those.
Right.
And that could be easily be something that
it's true
that they could create.
Whatever. Yes.
I just came off of 6 years of a project with Major League Baseball, for whom I wrote for 6 years. And Major League Baseball has a partnership with Scholastic, the Harry Potter people. And that out of that partnership, we produced a curriculum that is in 200,000 schools in the U.S. and Japan because of Ichiro. And each year there is a contest connected to the project. And in previous years, entire classrooms have won tickets to, well, one student wins the essay and his entire or her class goes to a major league game. It's been a very effective partnership. Some very exciting things have come out of it. And it's allowed baseball to do some good work, and it needs to do a lot more.
And Scholastic is a perfect venue for that because they are very open to those kinds of partnerships. I have a friend who's in a major project with them around math. And they have huge budgets and there's your audience. I mean, there's your budding audience. That's the part of the tree you really want to.
That's right.
So that's a great idea.
I went last night to a film called Invisible Children, and there's a website called InvisibleChildren.com, and this program was put on by kids here at the university who are activists, and they're just sick to death at what's going on with Ugandan children, you know, who walk every night into the town to sleep under somebody's porch and then walk back to their house the next day. And so they have a big fundraising drive, and what they're doing is they have this wonderful film, and they're trying to get people to call in or write in and pay $20 to get 2 copies, one for the person and one to pass on, and then hold house parties. Or parties like last night here on the campus in the Free Speech Cafe. They had, I don't know, 75 students, and they were crying when they watched this thing, and they were, not to say that would be the reaction to what you have, but I mean, you could use that tool. If you go and look at InvisibleChildren.com, I think it's the best thing I've seen in the way of getting a lot of people involved, deeply involved.
Can I just have one question to ask you? On your collection, you were talking about getting African Americans to turn over their collections. What are you hearing out there? And what are, you know, obviously you're after, you know.
We're on to a juicy one right now. We are so excited.
We wine them and we dine them and we, you know.
Like a couple of years ago, I met a flight attendant on United. He says to me, I was reading Lush Life, the biography of Billy Strayhorn. He says, oh, good book. I said, yeah. He says, oh, do you collect? I said, yeah, I collect first edition rare black books. And he says, oh, I collect too. I collect Black Civil War. So I kind of had to really process that for a minute. Phyllis and I went to Stockton 2 years ago to see his collection. It is one of the most amazing collections we have ever seen, bar none. He brought out a photograph taken about 1880 of a child being christened, went and said, just a minute, he brought the christening outfit. He has all of this Civil War memorabilia. He has 700 photographs. He has letters.
Oh,
he
has
has
house in Kansas on part of family.
Right. He has rings carved from leg bones from the battlefield. He has it. So he's someone
to nurture.
That his father passed, and we kind of stepped back and have allowed him to be with that. But people now come to us and say,
that's good.
We have these materials, and the more you talk to people and the more you say, you know, this little ink pen over here, you don't realize it, but this ink pen is valuable. This is the ink pen that your father used to sign for the deed for this house, and this house is now on the historical registry, and this ink pen can connect us to dozens of stories related to other black people. So once you work with people on bringing about some consciousness and understanding of the value, they get very excited. And somebody called Tony, what's this been, a year ago? Somebody I met, I don't even remember quite who this person was. Yes, and he wants to give his collection to Berkeley. So there are people out there who don't quite understand what they have, and you meet them in the most general places, cafes, airplanes, churches, schools, and once you say something, the light goes on. So this project has the phenomenal potential for the light going on. And as you interview these people, somebody needs to be saying,
Well,
what repository?
And
And I wonder, for an example, is anybody collecting Black Hollywood?
I
Other than Donald Bogle? I mean, are Black actors and actresses actively placing their papers somewhere?
Yeah, I constantly tell people, because a lot of people want to say things for family members. I said, if they're not interested, find an institution.
Yeah.
You know, so, okay, any other questions?
Think of Berkeley.
I will, no, okay. I'll tell them. So, we've got it, okay, wrap up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So wonderful. And these materials.
Yes, please, take some.
May I take one for Stanford too?
Yes, of course.